Hello everyone and welcome to another video. In this video we are going to discuss front-end JavaScript. I may expand this over two videos to make sure that each one is not too long. The first one will cover kind of the simple API, like the API used to manipulate elements in the document object model, which we'll talk about in a second. And the other one I will kind of talk about events and then the AJAX calls being made from the front end, whether it's post or get. We'll probably do get as an example and you guys can try out to post on your own. But in most cases, you can also use the post submissions for forms. Okay, but what this front end JavaScript is going to allow us to do is one, it is going to allow us to kind of manipulate the DOM. It allow us to add and remove elements from the DOM, modify text inside of it, add and remove CSS classes that we have on elements, listen for events, show flashing messages, all kinds of stuff that makes our web application more interactive with the users. We can also respond to user events as well. So it kind of makes it a little more engaging instead of the plain basic HTML pages that we can have, right? And then another thing we can do with this is making asynchronous JavaScript calls, which is what we kind of talked about in an earlier video with asynchronous JavaScript, where we can make a request for a resource and then not wait for it to respond, but we can do other things on our website. And then whenever it responds, we can show data on our page, which we'll talk about a little later. Okay, but these are the two kind of main things we can do with front-end JavaScript. DOM manipulation is one of the more interesting ones because it allows us to add a lot of neat little functionality to our website that you generally can't sometimes do in HTML or in CSS. Okay, so this DOM is basically a nice large tree-like structure that the browser creates from the HTML page that's been sent. Um, each element in this tree will basically be a node. We'll call them DOM nodes or call them nodes, whichever you want to call them. But they represent each element in your HTML page. These nodes have an API that you can work with, which allows you to control them and manipulate them to change their look, remove them, add events, remove events, all kinds of things you can do with it. Okay, you can even access other nodes from one node using this API as well. Okay, so if we have like a HTML page that kind of looks like this, this is just a generic groceries list with quite a few HTML elements. Some elements have childs. Some of them even have implicit children. Nothing that's not really a real term, but you're going to see that this figs over here, which is just plain text, that's a child of the list element, is actually going to be a node as well, which we'll call text nodes. But in any case, this HTML page will actually be turned into a DOM tree looking like this. And you can see we have the green kind of boxes are our node elements. These are the nodes that represent elements in our HTML. This yellow one up here is kind of a document element. It represents the root of our DOM tree. Most of the functions we're going to learn in a few minutes will start from this object up here. We have these red ones, which are attribute elements, which kind of, not kind of, they do store the HTML attributes that you add when you're programming HTML. These are not child elements; they're kind of a part of the node element itself. So these contain things like source, href, onClick, if you have onClick as an HTML attribute, class attributes, ID attributes, and stuff like that. Right? And then these purple ones are text nodes. These are the actual text stored in the element itself. Now you can see here this list element down here has a child element and a child text node. Together, this actually forms one text line, just that the text is going to be kind of wrapped in an emphasis element, but they are both going to be stored kind of in text nodes, right? And we'll talk about how to play with these in a second. Okay? So we're kind of talking about the parts. Document node is the top. Element node is the nodes that represent the HTML elements in the web page. H1, divs, bodies, asides, articles, any kind of elements that are on your page, even ones that are made up, will be DOM elements when it's converted. Okay. One thing to note: most of the JavaScript we've been doing so far in the other videos have been ran through Node. Node does not have a document object because there is no browser, so there's no need for it. There's also no DOM tree. So do not try to access the DOM object in Node because it doesn't exist, right? Since we are doing front end JavaScript, we are running in the browser. We are not running through Node or Node.js. I shouldn't say Node because there's no elements on the slide. But in any case, we are running through the browser, right? So we are not using Node.js APIs. We're not using anything in Node.js. All the JavaScript I'm going to run, I'm actually going to do in the console of Firefox to prove the point that we're just running it through the browser. Okay. So the document is basically the global object for this tree, and it represents a global object for one individual page. If you have like a 6-page website, each page will have its own global document object, and they will not collide or override each other. If you need to share kind of values across multiple pages, there's also a window object, which is the global object for a browser tab. So like this browser tab I have here is a window object. If I were to navigate a new page, it is still the same window object. Okay, so keep that in mind that we are now running JavaScript in the browser. We are not running it on Node.js. Okay? So we have a document node and a window node. We do not have these in Node.js. Okay? Element nodes we already talked about. Attribute nodes we already talked about. These represent the HTML attributes you add to HTML tags. The text node is what stores the text of HTML elements when they're in the DOM tree, and they do not have children. Okay, they can be children, but they do not have children. Right, and like I said earlier, the attribute nodes are not children nodes. They are actually part of the element. But it just for visual representation, it looks better like this because remember we talked about with CSS. I told you that CSS is basically going to kind of decorate this tree with ID and class attributes, which apply styles to each element that matches the query selectors or the CSS selectors that you write. It won't just be done by CSS or ID and class attributes. It can also be done by, all div tags or all H2 tags that are child of div tags. All those kind of CSS selectors we learned from the CSS videos and slides. Okay. Back over here. This is kind of the parts of the DOM tree. In terms of accessing the DOM, you can just do this in 2 simple steps. The first one is always required, which is simply deciding what element you want to grab. So you need to use some kind of function to grab this element. And then once you have it, you can use functions and certain kind of object properties to change the text of the element, how it looks, and stuff like that. Okay, so we need to figure out how do we grab elements. So two initial ways is to grab individual elements, because we can do get element by ID or use query selector. Use a query selector, it accepts a valid CSS selector. So all the CSS selectors you guys done in your CSS files, you can use this to find an element on your page. Okay? But it only returns one, so it will find the first one that match and then returns. Same thing for get element by ID. You notice the element is singular, not plural. It will find the first element that has an ID and then just return. Remember from the HTML slides, I told you guys that your HTML elements that have the ID attribute, those ID values should be unique everywhere you use them. No 2 HTML elements should have the same ID attribute value. Okay, that doesn't break your HTML if you do. However, if you use the element by ID, whichever one comes first or finds first is going to be the one that it uses. So, for instance, in here I have this HTML, right, and you can see it's kind of highlighted. I have an ID my list. Okay, so if I want to grab this unordered list by itself, I can use, let list or my list equals document get element by ID, and I'll give it an ID my list. I think it's my list, right? And you see here, if I type my list and just hit enter, it'll show me the element I have just grabbed. And then here you can kind of see all the object properties and functions, if they're attached, that you can call with this node. Right? This is basically a DOM node in our tree. Okay, so we have all these little functions and attributes: last child, first child, inner text, so inner HTML, inner text. What else? Last child, last element child, which we'll talk about difference in a second. There's also first child and first element child right here, which are these two. These are all your event listeners that you can attach depending on what event is triggered, mouse moving, and all that kind of crazy stuff. We have the outer HTML, which is kind of around it. The document owner, parent element, all that kind of good stuff. Parent node. There should be a children one too, but I don't think this one is set for this. Children, right, which is an HTML collection, which is all the children of the element I grab. So all this is a part of the DOM API, and you can use this to your advantage for manipulating the DOM itself. Okay. So I'm going to close. Actually, I'm just going to delete it because it's in the way. So you can grab a item or an HTML element with document get element ID. You can also say let list item equals document dot query selector. And what we'll do is we'll select all list items that are direct children of unordered list, right? And this is going to return the first one I see. Now, if you noticed in the HTML, technically this will actually match 4 list items because there are 4 there, but it only finds the first one I encounter. If I wanted multiple ones, if I do, list item equals document dot get query selector all, this actually does the same thing, but now we'll return a list or a collection of nodes, right? So I have a node list, right? Then if I wanted to, I can do list item dot for each item. I can, print them out to the console if I like. I knew how to type console.log item, right? And basically this prints out the 4 list items that I have in my own other list, right? So you have get element by ID, which grabs the first element that has the ID value found in the DOM. You have query selector, which finds the first element that matches the CSS selector you give it. You have query selector all, which finds all the elements that match the CSS selector. Okay? And we'll talk about this special one in a second. There's something unique about this function call here compared to the other functions used to grab multiple elements. Okay, so these all kind of return node lists. You'll see that some will be node lists, some will be HTML collections. There's a very important distinction between those two. I'm going to show you in a second. So we can grab all elements by class name or all elements by tag name. All elements by class name, which are all the classes that are in the class attribute. And then you have get elements by tag name, which is grabbing, grab all divs or grab all list items, so on and so forth. So if we were to say, okay, I don't want to do this, I just want to grab, let's say, let all list items equals document dot get elements by tag name, and we'll do list item. Okay, and we have all list items. Now the reason why I did all list items when I named this variable is because it will literally grab all list items on the page. Okay. Now if you notice, this is an HTML collection. If you look at the syntax, let me see if I can zoom in so you guys can see it better. If you look at the syntax, it is actually an object. It's a key value pair where the keys are indices, the values are the actual node elements. And then at the very end, there's a list element. A length element, and tells you how long it is. So this is what JavaScript and what people call an array-like kind of object. It's array-like because it looks like an array, but you cannot treat it like an array. And what I mean is on the array prototype, there is a for each function. But as you can see, my autocomplete has been terminated, and you can see the error right now. I don't have to run it. There's a type error because all list items does not have a function called for each. Right. So if I try to finish this, if I just ignore the warning, sometimes you get away with it. What happens is I do this, which is item, and I run it, I get the type error. But we can cheat this and convert the collection using the spread operator. It's also called deconstructuring in JavaScript, where I do this, and this will actually deconstruct this object into an array, where each item in the array will be an element. So each item in the object will be an element in the array. So now when I run this, I have my kind of iterable list of elements using get elements by name. This is very important, especially if you guys in React. This also can be used to merge objects, especially in React, that you're not supposed to modify state directly. You're supposed to make copies, modify the copies, and then merge it back together. It's kind of a functional programming kind of sense. when doing this. If you guys, me at 6600, you'll learn functional programming, which promotes pure functions, which are functions that have no side effects, which means the same inputs always produce the same outputs, does not modify or print anything outside the function, all that kind of crazy stuff. But this operator will come in handy. Okay, it allows you to turn collections that are array-like into actual array collections. Okay, so get elements by tag name, get elements by class name, where we can do. Can't redefine this. We can do get elements by class name. I think I have a class name called change on here. If you notice, I get another HTML collection. These are the two kind of elements that have the class attribute with the value change. Okay, this is again a collection. Okay, so we have ways to grab individual elements, ways to grab collection of elements. Now, one thing to be careful with this is that I blew by it. Well, not yet. I think it's down here. Okay, sorry. I skipped ahead. So I'll come back to this slide in a second. So one thing to keep in mind about these node lists is that they come in two kind of fashions, and this will pop up later in the video. These get elements or query selector all return lists or node lists or HTML collections. They come in two types. There's a live list and a static list. The live list will automatically update when the DOM changes. So like, say if you have a list of elements stored as a variable and somewhere else you update the DOM, say adding another list item, that live list will automatically be updated to represent the DOM, right? The collection will be updated. On a static list, if you have a list of items that you have in a variable and the DOM is updated, the list of the collection is not updated. So it does not see that change. So most of the ones you guys will use will be live lists. The only one that's a static list, as of last time I checked somewhere a couple months ago, is query selector all, which is not a live list. It is actually a static list. Okay, and then the slide I skipped over was accessing certain elements with a node. The parent node will give you the parent or the current node you just selected. You can go through all the siblings with previous and next sibling of the current element. You can also get the first and last children of the element. These can't point to the same element. There's only one child. If you don't like these variables, you can also use this syntax. This is a little harder though. You have array syntax. This will give you the first element, and you have the item function, which will give you the first item given a index. Right? So we have many ways of accessing the DOM and going through things. Okay. Now, in terms of updating, we want to update some text. If we have a text node, which is the purple node that we talked about earlier, we can use a node value property. Okay. So, for instance, if I want to update, let me zoom this in. If I wanted to update this clean room list item, what I can do is I have my list, right, which has my list items. So we do my list dot first child, which actually is a text, which is kind of somewhat empty. But it's going to be the first child of this. But what I really want is the node value. So I do node value. It's this big jump in here, which is kind of a new line character so that the list is a new line. But I don't want the node the first child of my unordered list. What I want is the first element child, which is a new little thing, which grabs the first non-text element, or at least non-text child in the unordered list. So this will grab the first list item, or at least the first HTML element that is a child, right? And then with this, I can do first child again. This will be the text node of the list item, and then I can do .node value, right? And you'll see here that it actually shows the value clean. This is basically what pop-up I hit into, right? What I can do is I can do clean in all caps. So we'll do clean. You'll see that the DOM has been updated. The text is now clean room. Now, if I wanted to update the room property or the room text, I actually have to add a lot more to this. So right now we're working from my list, which is an unordered list. The first element child is the list item. The first child of the list item is the text. The second child of the list item is actually the emphasis element. The first child of the emphasis element is the text node, and then that node value is room. right? So let's see if we can do this. So we get my list dot first element child dot first child. We do first element child dot first child dot node value, right? This is kind of what we have. So this is how you can access the room text from an unordered list. This is not an ideal, but nonetheless, it can be done. Okay. So if you wanted to change room, we can do room with a bunch of O's, right? And now we updated room, right? Not ideal that you should do it this way because this is a lot of dot, 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 dot together. But this is a kind of way you can kind of dig through the API, accessing certain elements. If we go to the JavaScript slide, let's see if this is actually in the picture. So from my unordered list, I went to the first child, right? The first element child, sorry. Then I went to the first element child of the list item. Then I went to the first child of the emphasis item, which is the text. Then I went to node value, which is the value stored in this text. So I actually went from here to here with this code right here. And it's not ideal, but it is what it is. Okay. This is where things like choosing a better selector would make your life easier instead of starting from my list. You can probably just grab the first collection of list items, grab the first list item, and then just do first child.node value. So you can probably replace this entire piece with a much better document.get element or you can use jQuery, which a lot of browsers, I think, actually have it built into now. So we can do this change, which should give me a list item, right? So in the beginning of the slides, I have some links here, which talk about some asynchronous JavaScript calls. This is actually a link to a jQuery library, which is kind of a nice little JavaScript library written on top of the DOM API to make DOM traversal and DOM manipulation easier. However, as time progresses, this is getting kind of old. Not saying it's bad, but most browsers are starting to support a lot of what jQuery has done and just throwing it into the browser. The good thing about this is the browser can do it a lot faster than the jQuery library itself. So a lot of times it's easy to get certain things by using this $sign syntax. So what we can do is, let's say I wanted this one right here. So this will grab the first one, I think, right? So I can do dot change that change. This happens to be the first one because we're lucky. Ish. And we'll do dot first. Spell first child. Check it. This is our text node. Dot node value equals clean. Then now we have updated the clean. It's a little cleaner syntax. We could do the same thing here, but you're still going to need that crazy syntax. Is where it's going to actually be first element child dot first child dot node value. This one actually should just be certificates. Let's see if I have the dot things going together. And there we go. I have a room. So this actually looks very like jQuery syntax, but a lot of browsers nowadays have it built in. Right? If you don't believe me, I don't have any jQuery linked. So there's no jQuery library linked to this file. Okay. This is where we can kind of manipulate the DOM, at least manipulate values and text inside the DOM itself. Okay. So let's go back to our access ones. This is going to be here, live lists. All right, so there's a node value. And this is a little example you guys can run and play it yourself if you want to try it out on your own. So another way to update nodes is inner HTML and text content. So what we can do here is we can get the same dot change, and let's just see what inner text puts out, which is clean room. What we can do is inner text. We can say clean room. If you notice, it actually updates all the text in the parent node and all the children nodes as well, right? And if we run, say, this one to forget, type error, first element is null now because I ruined it. So actually, let's go back to our list item here. You notice now I kind of ruined the child node. But it's okay. Okay, so we kind of lost it. But it allows us to change the text of the entire node. Okay, and then in HTML you can do the same thing, which will allow you to kind of change the elements of the but change the text uh, of the node, the DOM node. Sorry, it'll allow you to change the text to DOM node. However, inner text, you'll see it'll be like this, where it's like just plain strings. Inner HTML will actually give you um, the string representation of the HTML in there. So you would see the actual enclosing tags that are chosen. So if I wanted to add this back, let's say we do clean room, but we'll add in the emphasis room, and like this. When we go back to our inspector tab, you'll notice that the emphasis tag is now back. You cannot do that with inner text. So the inner HTML, the inner text will allow you to change text of a node, but it'll just be string values, like regular text string. And I spelled clean wrong apparently. And then inner HTML will allow you to represent HTML as a string, and will allow you to kind of add elements as a string, and the DOM will build the correct HTML elements for you. One thing to keep in mind though when doing these is that if you do these, any elements you add or remove, the event listers will be wiped out. So be very careful. Even if you just take the same string, remove it, and replace it back, if you have an event listener attached to this element, and you just say take the same value and write it again, the event listener for the emphasis will be wiped out and it'll need to be reset. So be very careful with inner HTML. It does not preserve these. If I remember correctly, it does not preserve these event listeners. Okay. So another approach. This is an example you guys can walk through if you like, which shows you the difference between the two. But another approach is actually using the functions of the DOM API, which is create element and create text node. Create element will allow you to create HTML elements in JavaScript. Create text nodes will allow you to create text nodes in JavaScript, and you can store text to an HTML element. Now, these are not automatically added to an element, so you have to kind of do it manually. Okay. Then you have append child and remove child, which allows you to add and remove elements given an HTML object or node, a DOM node object. Okay, this is kind of an example here. So, for instance, if we were to say, okay, I'm going to make a new element, so I have my list, right, which contains my list items. So we'll do my list.children, which are all my children of my list, right? Let's say if I want to add another one. So we'll do let new li equals document dot create element. Do list item. Then we'll do let new list item text equals document dot create text node. We'll say newly added list item. Okay, so now what I have here is a newly created list item node, a newly created text node, right? So I have new list item. I hit enter. This is the list item. It doesn't have any text in part of it, right? So what I can do now is we'll clear this. Is we'll do new list item dot append child new text node, right? And we'll do this. Now if we do new list item and we look at it, you'll see that it actually has an inner text like this, right? So we actually have some text. Now what we can do is we'll do my list append child new list item, right? And then when I hit enter, if I didn't make a mistake, it should appear on the screen, and it does. Okay. Now, getting back to sorry, got children. The static and live list, you notice that I added a kind of a new DOM node, and the list has been updated. but I didn't grab a new list with the query selector or any of the kind of get elements functions. It is updated because it's a live list. So any more I add will automatically be a part of this list. So you can actually create an infinite list where you have two loops where one loop is adding, one loop is traversing. As long as one is ahead of the other and it keeps adding items, it can be infinite. Not really a useful thing, it's just a fun thing you can do. See if you have like a tortoise and a hare problem where one's chasing the other. So that's kind of the way you guys can create and add or remove children in terms of DOM nodes. Okay. Another part of the API is kind of setting HTML attributes, seeing if a HTML element has an attribute and removing it, or actually getting it itself so you can do other stuff with it. Okay, so we can use this in our JavaScript to kind of add and remove classes on the fly. A very common thing to do in React and other front-end frameworks as well is kind of adding and removing classes dynamically depending on certain events. In any case, in React, all your HTML is JavaScript. JSX, which is kind of a JavaScript extension that React uses, all JSX is really a bunch of create elements, create text nodes, and append children. Right? All that JSX is returned to all these elements here, these function calls here, which allows you to build the HTML page. Right? Then it builds the virtual DOM it's virtual shadow DOM, whichever one it's called, I can't remember exactly. That React uses to render and then do incremental updates. Okay? But JSX really is just a kind of a little JavaScript extension to do this much easier. So, and then you use these two. But if we want to manipulate HTML attributes, we can use these functions here. So, for instance, if I wanted to, let's clear this window, do my list get attribute, we can do dot class, or not dot class, I get this string, right? Now, if I do my list set attribute, I do class, let's say, just C1, it's going to update the attribute of my list. If you notice now, it's not going to append or remove, it's just going to override it. So if you're going to need to append classes, you're going to have to do set attribute, then my list get attribute, do class, sorry. And then we're going to have to add it to, say, I don't know, C2, C3, C4, and C5. Close it out. And then come back here and you'll see that I have the original back. So we can use this to kind of, add and remove attributes. We can take it all together. We can just do my list. You can just remove the attribute. And it's gone. Right? At least go back to it. It is gone from this list right here. All we only have is the IG attribute. Okay? And then you can use the my list for each let's see, list item. We could say if list item has attribute class, we can do some work, right? If it does, we can say console.log log out list item, right? Oh, my list is not iterable. So the spread operator is for, dude. Maybe it's not like what I'm doing anymore. May have ruined my list. Good spot this earlier. What did I do before? Oh, it should be children, not my list dot. Okay, I see. I see my mistake. It should be dot children, then dot for each, then list item, then our crazy fat error syntax, then console dot log list item, right? There you go. And then we can go through and say, oops, can't get it back down because I messed it up. Then we can go back and say if list item dot has attribute class, we can do some work in console.log list item. Right, and then we won't do anything else. Right. Unexpected token, colon. Where's my colon? Right. And then you see here that I kind of probably messed up the has attribute. I think it takes 2 parameters. Existent. I may have messed it up. Well, actually, yeah, no, that's correct. Sorry. They all had the class attribute, so we can see if the class attribute, these if they have these class attributes. And if they do, what we can also do is, let's just remove it. Right? Say, if you have the class attribute, you're not going to have it anymore. So remove it. Type remove attribute is not a function, because I can't spell. Let's add this from O here. Run it. I did update. Oh, I removed it again by hitting okay. There we go. We get undefined because this for each function doesn't return anything. But we come here now, you notice my list items, none of them have attributes. Okay. So we can use these to kind of manipulate the attributes of an HTML and via JavaScript. And then this is a little piece of code you guys can look at and play with if you like to kind of go around manipulating this. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. In another video, I'm going to do the event API and then probably do an example of the fetch and asynchronous calls that allows me to add kind of pictures and stuff to my DOM. Okay, so I'll see you guys in the next video.